And so it's like, I remember these conversations where they were like, never go into business for yourself. And now as a business owner that has a team, I'm like, Dad, please, like if he would let me sit down and be like,
or let us teach you to at least put it on QuickBooks so it's done digitally and they can pay you with a credit card versus mailing a check.
Checks in the mail, so it's just like, it's interesting how it's like, I'm a rebel, I guess, in that sense, where it's just like they told me my whole life, like, never start your own business. And now we're like...
They also told you not to marry me. So look how that worked out.
So I just kind of do the opposite, I guess, of whatever they say.
Hey, Brianne and Danny, welcome back to the show.
Oh my gosh, we're so excited to be back.
Thank you for having us.
So last time we talked about podcasting, which is like the bread and butter of what you guys do technically in your business, but I wanted to unpack more of your story because this is really like the other side of entrepreneurship is, yes, we have plenty of technical tips for you. We have lots of knowledge to share, but let's talk about your business, your life, and how things kind of started out for you, because there's so much as part of that message and why you do what you do that's embedded in that. So let's just start with building a business as a husband and wife combo. You and I both follow Layla and Alex. We see a ton of, these are the Hormozis, by the way. We see a ton of content now from husband-wife combo businesses. And there's just a lot of different advice, a lot of different tips. I want to hear your story about, you guys built a business together. Was that always the plan? Let's talk about kind of how this all came about.
What the hell's a plan? That was more the energy of how this all went. Like there was no plan. I think for us it was, hey, here's this value I'm adding to people, and Danny's running a lot of things out of his brain. And then, as Brianne has come in, now we're finally like, we're 3 years in as of August 6th. And now we're looking at this like, oh, do we have a specific goal in the future? Yes, we do. Okay, now we're trying to make a plan. So you can take that deeper. But to me, that was just to give a reference point of where we started. This was a big happy accident.
Yeah. And the business in general, was that like, you guys ever intend on starting a business together?
No. I mean, we didn't even intend on starting a business.
I never viewed myself as an entrepreneur ever. Like I always, like, even listening to like Gary Vee and like kind of being around people, he always talked the story about how like you're better to be number 12 or number 20 at Facebook than number 1 at the thing that fails. And I was like, oh, that's me. Like, I'm a great executor. If I can be like a number 2, 5, 10 at something else, that would be fantastic. And I got to be that at another company. I was number 2. And like, I realized a couple years in that I was like, man, I would really like to call the shots a little bit, because this is just not working for me the way that I thought it would. And then I started thinking like, maybe I could do this on my own, but never had the guts to do it. And then got fired from that. And that was like a beautiful gift of like, well, I have no choice now. Like, I have to do something. And I wasn't even sure that I would stay in this industry because I felt so much loyalty to that one that I was like, oh, can I even do this? Is this like a non-compete? I don't know. I didn't have a paperwork saying I couldn't compete, but I felt like I didn't know if I should. And the day I got fired, Brianne and I got to go out to lunch because she happened to be off that day. And basically we came to the conclusion, and like Brianne gave me a very good gift. But we came to the conclusion that if I could freelance the skills that I had learned and just make up $1,000 in that first month, that $1,000 plus her job made sure all the bills were covered. And she was like, if you can make up that $1,000, I trust you, find a way to do it. We'll move forward as you staying as a freelancer, and like, we'll figure it out past there. There was no rush to go get a different corporate job or go do something like that. She just said, I trust you to figure it out. That was the start of everything.
Yeah, I feel like our whole journey in our relationship, let alone in our business, could be summed up of like, we have a common goal that we're moving towards in the future, but like how that happens pivots and changes. And so, yeah, I mean, like this whole business literally started as like us sitting down at that table and being like, hey, well, we've had quote safe jobs before. Like he literally was just fired from something.
Yes.
And so it's like, okay, well, worst case scenario, we do this for a month or 2 or 3. And if it doesn't work out, then he can go get another job and we'll go from there. But it was that kind of question of like, okay, well, let's just see what happens. We have this common goal of, taking care of our family and, So we're just like, "Okay, we can do
Yeah.
that. We'll move forward with that."
Yeah. We knew the safe thing wasn't really safe because I'd been laid off from 3 safe jobs in like 7 years. So, and it was
Wow.
like that, it doesn't compute as much to me anymore. So, yeah.
Yeah. Let's unpack a little bit more though too, because you guys were telling me a bit about your story and like you guys got married really young.
Hmm.
Tell me more about like your relationship journey because that probably, I mean, every business journey as a couple is like rooted on the foundation of the relationship itself, right? Like without a strong relationship, there is no strong business on top of it. So let's talk about a little bit of the relationship journey and share that with our listeners.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so we're high school sweethearts. So cute. We were
Started dating
like,
at 16,
we were 16, which I
just
mean,
never stopped.
I look back now, we have a 13-year-old daughter, and I just think about like her in 3 years. I'm just like, you're just a baby. And so back then we thought we were really cute. We were probably just like, we're still call ourselves like crazy kids.
Yeah.
But we met at 16, and we actually, oddly enough, met at our job. So we both worked for this catering company that we look back now and we're like, that was definitely like some sketchy child labor situation. Like we would work like 15-hour days, like going to these events and catering,
Yeah.
from some, an event in the morning to a wedding that went way late at night, but we loved it. And I think we made like five something an hour. Like
Hmm.
it was just crazy.
I
And
can relate.
so,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, we just kind of started and, I mean, both of us come from families that are, um, not the wealthiest of mindset or of finances. And so, like, for us, we were just like, we just wanted to go out and get a job and provide for ourselves. So we very much were those kids. And even in the beginning of a relationship, we would be looking at each other and being like, you know what, I'm like literally running on fumes. I need money for gas. And we would like help each other. So we were kind of like, had this, you know, I don't know, like I feel like this partnership from a really young age of just like watching out for each other and just working our jobs and going to school and doing those
Yeah.
types of things. And then we got married when I was 18 and he was 19 and had our first child a year and a half later.
Yeah.
And then 2 years after that, our son. So by the time I was 21, I had two kids and we'd been married for, I don't know, do the math. I'm not a math person,
Yeah.
you know, a handful of years that normally by the time you're 21, you're not married that long.
Yeah.
And so we've kind of grown up together. I feel like we've navigated a lot of those years of figuring out who you are, side by side, and I feel like that's really, because of how we've done it and put each other first. I think that's helped us in everything we do now in our business of communicating, because like we've had a lot of those like tough years, I will say, of like figuring out who we are and tough challenges that have even brought us to the point of like, is this still working? Like, are we going to make it through this challenge together? From such a young age that it just kept us like moving forward together.
Wow. Yeah. And so talk to me about, you guys were dating, you guys were together. Um, like the evolution though of, the relationship and, having kids and, going through all these different, like you mentioned, the safe jobs that weren't really safe. And then
Yeah.
Hmm.
everything else that was going on, like that must take a toll on, like on mindset, on mental health, things like that. So just unpack that a little bit on and just kind of like more of the journey to get because it takes a shit ton of resilience to get to the entrepreneurship level. Like there is
Yeah.
definitely some in between there, and a lot of probably mindset testing along the way.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say we had our share of challenges we had to get through as a couple, and I think that obviously prepared us. One of the biggest parts of our story, and like she can tell you from her perspective, I'll tell you from my perspective. By the time I was 25 because I'm 33 now. I have to think about that. I shouldn't have to think about that so hard, but I do. Um, but essentially, when I was 25, we had already been married for a handful of years. We had two kids. I had a good corporate job at the time. And, like, mind you, before that, when we lived in southern Utah, we had just been married. She worked as a CNA. I worked in a factory. I never thought I would leave that factory. I thought maybe one day I'll run that factory, but that was as big as my brain could possibly go. And like I helped in the production line. I was easily the most like utility guy there. I took pride in just being a boss there and like loving it. But then it was like 08, 09 when all of everything crashed. there's no longer a need for windows to build skyscrapers, and we're the smallest plant, so we're getting shut down. And in my head, that was like, that was the safe job. Like, what are you talking about? Like at 18, 19, I was making more money than my parents, and they had degrees. I was working in a factory and I actually enjoyed it. So it was cool. I was very lucky that I had a friend try to introduce me to door to door sales to recruit me away from the factory. And I was like, you're effing crazy. That's not happening. But they challenged me to read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And he talked about
Mm.
owning the ladder instead of climbing the ladder. And I started to get that mindset shift. And I was like, well, that's really cool. And then I finally like had said, yes, like I think I'm going to go do this with you. So I was willing to like give it up and go do like the scary thing. And literally 2 days later, they announced we're shutting down the plant. And I was like, I'm the only
Oh.
one here not in a complete panic because no one else knew. I was already thinking of leaving. So luckily I had that. We came down to Arizona. I did multiple, like, I did door to door sales doing pest control. It was my first time. Like, I didn't think I even had people skills. Like, I know I can just talk to people because that's not a crazy thing to me. But like most of my people skills were like talking crap over walkie talkies on a night shift in a factory. It's not the same thing, you know? And then now I'm going door to door and taking people from, I hate you. Why did you knock on my door? To totally, here's my credit card information in a matter of 5 minutes. That's a hell of a skill to learn.
Yeah.
So I started learning that, and then summer ends, and well, I guess that's done. So I go get the good corporate job, and I'm like, best thing ever. I have a base salary plus commission. I just learned sales. Everything's fantastic. They have a company car, like at least money for a car. It's paid for by the company. Like in my world, I had made it.
Mm.
And I had the wife, the two kids, the nice house, the nice cars, good corporate job. Like on paper, I'm 25, killing it. And I was miserable and I couldn't tell you why. And more so than miserable, I was numb and I just didn't really like have
Mm.
feeling. And I now can look back and understand that I was like really depressed and I just didn't know and I didn't know how to do it. And I wound up changing, thinking like, well, if I go back and get a different job, that'll kind of shake things up and that'll feel better. So I went back to door sales, actually doing alarms, and we up and rooted the whole family, went out to Kentucky for a summer. And that became like the catalyst for just like the next couple years being really hard because it turns out doing a door to door sales job when you're suicidal is really freaking hard because all you're
Ooh.
doing is having like doors slammed in your
Rejection.
face and rejection and like all these
Yeah.
things. And again, I can look at it now and say that like I wouldn't change it. Like I've grown so much, I learned so much through those things. But what wound up happening is I tanked our life and essentially couldn't hold it together and couldn't like it's weird because right now I can't see myself being this way because I've grown a lot, but I couldn't function in a job. I couldn't do things. And we wound up losing our house, losing some cars, like everything went to hell. And we had to go down to Texas and live with my sister. But even then, I got to hide it because the team that I was doing door to door with when the summer ended, they got assigned to Texas the next summer. So I was like, hey guys, I'm going down early. Told no one what I was actually going through. And we just went down and stayed with my sister. And I wound up again doing door to door through that summer, but it was like on and off because if I was having a good day, I understand enough about personal growth, sales, leadership that I was a really good person to have on the team. But if I was having a bad day, I was a cancer to the team. And there
Mm.
wasn't much in between. So it was a really struggle sesh of a time where we had to then do almost a year of deciding I'm fed up with this and we can't go. And I think that was the thing that like towards the end of that year, this was 2016, we went from January to October. And then finally, like her and I made the decision that I have to go back to Arizona alone and we have to figure out how to get back because we didn't want to start over in Texas. We wanted to come what we called home. And she was amazing and supported and actually went and got like a safe W-2 job, like working multiple things at Kohl's and Costco and whatever it took. And I went back to door to door sales, but here in Phoenix, and I made enough to just get us here. And that was like, okay, we can do hard things. And it's just been a slow growth since then. And again, I left the door to door to help, be employee number one at a different media company because I was getting passionate about one of the things that brought me out of all of these things was I was able to listen to people in podcasts that I never would have had access to. So me feeling like I had no mentors, me feeling like I had no leadership, no examples of people who had done this before, who had made it out alive, suddenly I had that. And it made me very passionate about podcasting because I like who no time in history, I mean, there's been books, but no time in history have we been able to just like, I want to learn about this. And you can literally look it up and learn in 30 seconds, or you can hear stories. That was what drew me to this. And that was what drew me to the other company. And then I've already said I got fired from that once we started button heads and I grew. But what gaps am I missing on your end?
Yeah, I was going to say, I want to hear Brienne's perspective of this whole thing too,
Yeah.
because I imagine that's challenging to like accompany your partner through.
Yeah.
For sure. And I think whether you're the person who has struggled with, anxiety or depression, or like, someone who has, like, we're all a mix of those things. These are very human things to go through. And so for me as the support person, we're going through this journey and I see him at this corporate job where he's not happy. And I'm like, whatever is going to make you happy, like as a partner, you're just like, I just want you to be happy. And so he came to me with this idea, and so I was like, 1,000%, we'll do whatever we need to do. And as it got worse, I go through all these stages of grief as you would imagine. So it's like you see your partner, the person you love more than anything in the world. And at first, of course, I'm like having empathy for him. And I want to be there to support him in all these things, but it goes on long enough that I start to then be like, is this a life that we've created together? Literally everything, blood, sweat, and tears that we've built together, our kids, is this not enough to make you happy? And I didn't understand at that time, this is still me also thinking that it's my job to make him happy. I
Mm,
can't do that for anybody else but myself. And so that was one of the hugest lessons for me of that whole year, was like, you know what, your happiness, like I, that's my job. His happiness is an internal job too. And so like throughout this whole time, I think the saving grace for us, honestly, is that we just had open communication. So he
mm,
like subtly through that was like, yeah, when I was suicidal, he just like dropped that there in the middle of the podcast. Like we were talking about these things, like as it was happening, and he was saying like, I'm having these thoughts, this struggle with my mental health, with my worthiness, with my, you know, numbness, my desire to be here. Not because, he felt that, and if I can speak for you and things that you've shared with me, is it wasn't that he was like, this family isn't, good enough, or this life isn't good enough for me to be here for, like I was perceiving it. He said, all of this is so great. I'm not good enough for this.
Like you guys
Like
deserve better
we
than me.
deserved better. And so I think a lot of people
mm.
that are going through those things, again, like I haven't experienced this to the same level that he has personally, but I've witnessed it so closely and intimately. And I
Yeah.
think that's the thing, is like, you are worthy, and regardless of your actions. Like I love him regardless of whether, he has a ton of money, or we're on the ground floor figuring out, how to grow. And so, we're going through all these different things. And I finally, like, I describe this to people. For him, that was his, rock bottom of his mental health being low. For me, it was my season of being in victim mode. And so
Mm,
I was, we're kind of going through the same experience side by side with different mentalities. Like I was going through it, realizing, okay, I had to get to the point to realize no one else is going to come save us. Here we have these
yeah.
two incredible little kids, and I had to get honestly angry enough. Like this was like one of the biggest lessons to me, that anger put towards, positive action can be a great thing, is I had to get angry and like over my own bullshit to be like, you know what, that's it. And that's when we sat down and had that conversation, lots of conversations along the way, lots of grace and love that I have for those versions of ourselves that, you know, we're literally like underwater breathing through a coffee straw to get through the day. That's what it felt like. You
Yeah.
can't expect a lot from that person, to be honest. But
Yeah.
but then I finally got to that point where I was like, okay, no one else is going to come save us. We have to do something. And so going through that whole experience honestly was the biggest gift, because I was able to see the contrast of what happened when we finally were like, okay, you're going back to Phoenix. I'm staying here. I'm getting multiple jobs. working at Kohl's, being the person to unload the truck and sort things out, being the person at Costco that folds all the clothes. It's very intentional. If you go to Costco, everything's, perfectly done to a certain standard. Okay. So like I did those jobs because I knew they would be easy to walk away from and I wanted to come to again home here in Phoenix. But I had to do something. And so, it started with that. And because of that lesson, like hindsight's 2020. Now I can look back and take those things of like, ooh, when I feel myself slipping into that victim mode, I can say, I got to go do something.
Mm.
I got to take some action step. And so that led from, okay, well, we'll, work. We were apart for 8 weeks and still together, not separated, like physically separated in different places, but working towards the same goal. And that, working at Kohl's for, I don't know, $8 an hour and turned to working at Costco for $13 an hour, turned to coming home here and me getting a job at the hospital down here in Phoenix and working there. And then eventually, working at a doctor's office for one of the surgeons that I worked for. So it all kind of like, it was these baby steps. I think a
Mm.
lot of people see someone's success and they're like, overnight success. They all of a sudden now have this huge, we run a multi six-figure business and we have a team of now 9 people that work for us. And you know what I mean? You see that, and it literally all came from like the tiniest building blocks, growing off of each other to the point where we were like, okay, now we have enough belief from doing that we can do something together on our business. And even that, like we've already explained, like was accidental. But because we got to that point where it was like, oh, like cut off this, source of income. He doesn't have this job anymore. I'm like, okay, we've had nothing before except this.
Hmm.
We can
Mm-hmm.
do that again and rebuild. And so
Yeah.
that made it easier for me to bet on us because I'm like, oh, we've been betting on ourselves over these last few years. We know what we've come from and through, and we can do it again.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to build off of the like I heard a couple times in your story this like financial condition. Like if we can do this, then this. So like if we at least make that extra 1,000 a month, or if we do this, then this will happen. But you always had like a measurable like okay, like this is the goalpost now. And it's interesting that a lot of it is financial. Like as long as we can make this much money, we can then do this thing. Um, that it's such a cool concept to like actually come to the table and have like the macro goal together but also like the micro goals together and say this is what we need to do right now in this moment, knowing that it's going to work towards a bigger goal. And you know where did that come from in terms of like the ability to, I mean, did you guys come to the table, talk about money, talk about, hey, this is where we're at right now, this is where we want to be? What was that whole journey like in terms of your relationship, like as a team, around the financial condition of the family and the household?
I mean, I think it just came down to like, what is our need?
Yeah.
Yeah,
you
like the
know,
I was just say
survival.
like,
step one was how do I just make the bills?
yeah,
That
Yeah,
was
like how to do
all
the
it was at
survival.
first.
we've had multiple times where we've been gifted, and I can say that now because when you're in the thick of it, it really sucks. But when you have your back against the wall, we're like, okay, well, like the money is an easier thing to measure, right? And and
Right.
and it was a thing that we needed. Like it's hard for us to sit down and be like, are we, let's be even closer in our relationship next week than we were now,
Yeah.
and even then, if you want to do that, okay, well, what are the actions that bring us closer together? So for money, I think
Right.
that's the easy example, is just because it's like, okay, well, we have this need. And so,
Yeah.
and
It's like a
so I think,
hierarchy, like the
Yeah.
yeah,
survival, right? And then like
yeah,
you
Yeah.
go
but
up beyond that. What was
totally.
the journey though from, from the like survival mode to the higher level goals? Like we want to actually thrive together. How do we make that happen? Right? So like the goals have elevated because you guys aren't now like, what do we have to do in order to do X? Like now you guys are
Hmm.
actually like more expansive, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What had to unlock, other than like the bills are paid, right?
Yeah.
But like what had to unlock in order to kind of shift that mindset and to say we're not just going to survive together, we're going to grow together?
I'll speak for me, like in terms of like the financial, the business, those kinds of
Yeah,
things.
yeah, yeah.
Once again, I'm back to I had to see an example because
Mm,
again, like we grew up without having families. Like her dad is an entrepreneur, but he's a solopreneur. So
mm,
he's not trying to grow an empire. He's not trying to do these different things. My parents both have degrees, don't use them, and like they just have basic jobs. So like I never saw an example of someone who was like wealthy. I never saw an example of someone who led teams and like did all these big things. And for me, again, it's like now one of the biggest things that we have invested in, and again, she trusted me to just, I said, I want to be a part of this. And she said, okay, if it's going to bring something back or you're going to grow, whatever that payoff is, like, let's figure out what that is. But like, I put myself in rooms. Like, you've been a part of Fast Foundations, you've seen how that
Hmm.
goes. And the Fast Foundations Mastermind was started by Chris and Lori Harder. It's now owned by Jim and RT. And I just wanted to be in rooms with people who also just had an idea and then turned thin air into like this tangible thing that pays my bills.
Right.
And then once you're in there, you start seeing that like, oh, there's levels to this, because some people, the goal is like, how do I make 50 grand on the side? That's a good goal. There's no shame in that goal as the whole goal. But there's also people who are like, hey, what would it take for my business to make 8 figures and I get to take home $1 million a year? How would I construct that? And I'm like, my brain doesn't compute that. But when I'm around people who are like, hey, this is actually what this looks like when I do this, suddenly I believe in it. One of the people I'll shout out is like Jim Carter, who
Hmm.
now is like one of the co-owners of Fast Foundations. Like, I've watched him over the last 3 years, like, just grow as a human, as a leader and all these
Mm.
things, and go from like,
Yes.
he was the guy who was in tech land in San Francisco, a coder who just was a part of so many different projects that we don't even really know. Like, he was a part of all kinds of things. And then like now he runs his own agency and does these different things. And you've watched him go from like that kind of quiet coder dude to like now he's running a multi 7 figure agency and doing these different things and being a face of it. And I was like,
Hmm.
oh, again, I can't look at people who are running $100 million company and being like, that's me. But I can look at someone who's like 2 to 5 years ahead of me and like be like, actually, I believe in that. Like, I believe I could grow into that. And I
Yeah,
think
they're in
those
an
are the
arm's
people who
length.
inspire me.
They're only an
Yes.
arm's length away. And my philosophy is like, if at least they're an arm's length away, they can reach back to grab you.
Yes.
If
Yeah.
they can't reach back to grab you, they're too far ahead of you for you to feel like you can touch them. But like
Yeah.
that person who's just far enough ahead to be able to reach back and say, "Hey, I was just in your position in the last 2 years. Let me help you," is invaluable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beyond putting yourself in the room, because that is, I mean, that could be like the one takeaway from this is like just get yourself within arm's reach. That's
Yeah.
freaking huge. Um, the things that I think of is, oh, I had a brain fart. Talking about, oh, the level of conversations that we have. So
Mm,
I think going from, just surviving to thriving, because part of what got out of a survival mode wasn't just the like going after the financial goals. It was working on our mindset and diving into like learning from mentors and listening to podcasts and those kinds of things that like it's one of the things I love about working with my husband is that like we get to have our own little mini masterminds and be like, hey, this is what I'm learning. And we get to talk about these things. And then we get to gamify it because now we're not,
mm.
we're not up against the wall. We've made some progress, but we have the gift of knowing that like, ooh, we could go from there to here. Now, how do we gamify that? Put the same pressure behind us to then take it to the next level. And so, yes, like being in rooms, like that's a huge piece of that. But then, like, once we come home from that, having an accountability partner, whether it's your actual partner or, a friend, what, like, are you having those higher level, higher thinking, um, big dreaming conversations on the regular? Because that's also something that's very motivating for me. Like, I love to see the bigger vision to work towards. And so then you get to gamify it. Then you get to take those, smaller steps towards it. And it gets to be exciting.
I love that. What are you guys doing on a daily basis now, or even weekly basis, to make sure that the communication's there, to make sure that you have something to share with each other? Because I imagine you guys mentioned like you're an arm's reach away from each other in your office.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
hey, hon, how was your day? Same as yours. I was next to you the whole day. Like, how do you keep it interesting so that you have like, you know, new ideas to share with each other, or you're bringing something to the table and you're keeping, do you keep business in the office and like keep it out of the dinner conversation? Like, what are some of your tips for couples who are trying to work together, and what's worked well for you?
I'll say we go on walks, and that walk
Mm,
time is a combination of dreaming. It's a combination of business. It's a combination of like just relation. Like nothing's really off limits on the walk, but we usually will try to communicate, hey, this is what I need right now. Meaning this walk might be my time to vent, and I'm just going to need you to deal with that and just let me run because I need that. Other times it's, hey, we know we're going to walk for the next 45 minutes. This is the problem we're going to try to solve. Let's talk through this, and we'll keep going. But I think it's really being open about that intent early of saying, hey, this is what this is going to be. And not all walks have an intent. Sometimes we're just out to walk, and wherever the conversation goes, fantastic. But we know when we have that time, it's just her and I. We don't have a phone on us. There's no laptop. There's no one else asking for our time. We can just talk. I think that's one of the easiest big things that we've done that has made a big difference, especially like we've really implemented that over the last like 4 to 6 months. And it's my favorite thing we do.
Yeah, I feel like we've gotten so much better at this. Obviously, diving into business together, like I was not great at this in the beginning. And it was something I remember we had booked a hotel for a weekend to go and like put our systems in place. So I was like, okay, like this is something that will be great. We'll book the hotel for the weekend. We'll focus on business over this weekend and knock a bunch of stuff out. And then I realized like we booked it, checked into the hotel, and he's my husband also. So it's like I went into this and realized I'm like, oh, there's all these feelings that are coming up. Like we were sitting at lunch and I just was like crying about how I wished our relationship was closer, like in our marriage. Like the intention was like, hey, let's block off this time to work on business. And I realized when I got into it, my heart and my mind and the things that were like, I had been putting our relationship on the back burner to work on the business. So that by the time we had this like disconnected time where there was no one, like we blocked it off. Like, team, get in touch with us. We're focused on this. Our kids are at his sister's house. We have this dedicated time, and all my heart and mind wanted were like to pour into our relationship together. And so it's like we definitely do need to take that time for our relationship before anything else. We've gotten better at this and have like great friends in our lives. Mike and Kara Ayala. I don't know if you guys you have connected with them. They're incredible. We just love them so much. And we were on a call with Mike at one point, and so we're all going over business stuff. This was, I don't know, maybe a year ago. And he was like, like, when's your regular date night? We're like, oh, like we don't really have one. And he's like, oh, forget this business stuff. Like that's step one. Like we'll get to that. Make sure you're having that date night every week to prioritize our relationship. And so since we've done that, and since we've had time for our relationship, because of it can be so easy for us, especially like kid you not, we could high five each other like and have from desk to desk. So there's no shortage of time spent together, but like what's the intention? And so like having that intentional time for us as like a romantic couple and to get to know each other and have fun together and have space for that. And then like we're able to come into our business even better. And we don't really compartmentalize it in the sense that like when we're on date night, because I used to think this, okay, we're going into business together. We can never talk about the business we're on date night. And then we'd be sitting there and be like, well, like if the kids and the business and this are off limits, like, like these are the things we're the most passionate about. So we kind of look at it and say, okay, like you said, we go into it with the intention, like we're not going to be solving a problem or talking about an issue, in the business or something we need to solve with a team member or whatever. Like that's definitely off limits at the, the date night table. But if we're sitting talking about our big vision together and like we get to be in kind of problem solving mode or idea generation mode, like I think I was describing this the other day of just like, I want our time together to focus on a relationship to be things that feed into our energy. So I just walk away from that feeling filled versus, putting my energy into something else, into problem solving or something like that. So it's kind of how I gauge it more on like the energetic side. But yeah, I mean, we love getting to kind of let everything flow, including like we love our kids to be able to be part of business conversations at the dinner table. We don't keep that here in our little, spare room office of the house. Like we allow that to be, part of the conversation. So they're hearing these higher level conversations that we wish we would have heard at that age.
Do you think the kids have any like, are they drawn to entrepreneurship, away from entrepreneurship, or
they're
like
more entrepreneurial than we are? Like
really?
our daughter Nevaeh, like she's 13 now, but this was like probably 3 years ago. This is prior to pandemic. So she was like 9, 10 when this was going down. But she decided, like everyone has their like thermo flask water bottles,
Mm-hmm.
and she knows that people love stickers for those. So she became the black market of her middle school for stickers and candy. And she was like, "Can we go to Costco and buy a big thing of candy so that I can sell these things?" And she went on eBay and spent $5 and got this like 500 pack of stickers. And then she would literally like lay them out and make a spread and sell them to people. And she got shut down by the school because they're like, "You can't do this. Like, this is not okay." But then she realized like the after school people who were watching her, they didn't care. They were the ones buying the stickers. So Nevaeh legitimately became the black market of her school for candy and stickers. And then she is someone who considers herself a victim of the pandemic and lost her business over
It
it.
did the
Like, it was a
pandemic.
Like she
hilarious
should have
thing
got
to hear.
PPP funding. Oh
It
my
was a
She
God.
really,
hilarious thing to hear from an 11-year-old at the time, because she was like, "I had this. It was running. It was so
she
good."
she's
That's
so
so
funny.
funny.
She had that to the point where we even went on vacation as a family, and she's like so smart. We didn't tell her to do this, but there'd
Mm-mm.
be people be like, "Oh, give me the sticker now or the candy bar now. I'll pay you tomorrow." And she's like, "Guess what? Here's a Ziploc bag with your name on it. I'll put this sticker and I'll hold it for you till you can bring me the cash tomorrow." And she would literally do that. And we went on vacation and she hired a couple of her little girlfriends, and she was like, "Okay, I'm not going to be here, but here's these bags of people, like people owe me money for these. If you'll take the money," she's like, "I'll give you a kickback of part of that for keeping her business running while we
Yeah.
were on vacation." This is literally like she should be our
Oh my
mentor. Just be like,
God.
"Okay,
Yeah.
what makes sense
There
to you?"
are,
Like a 13-year-old that they just understand. She's like, "Well, if I," and she put her own money into it. She didn't
Yeah.
ask us. She was like,
This
oh
was
"Hey,
my
like
can we?"
birthday
gosh.
money
It
funded.
was like birthday money, and she was like, "Okay." And she even got to the point where she's like, "You know what? Like, this candy didn't sell as well. This one sold super fast to the point where the
Oh my
last few
God.
ones people paid double her price, her already marked up price for." So she would go take her profits, go back to the store, buy more of that candy, and go sell it again. So I mean, they're just
Oh
like,
my gosh.
they just
Airheads
have
for the
it.
win, for the
And
record.
and you talk
Airheads are the
about,
go.
yeah, Airhead sold really, really well here in Phoenix,
Yeah.
Arizona. I'm sure like melty chocolate maybe had something to do with it. But I mean, you talk about the difference in conversation. Like, you brought up my dad. Like, I'm
Wow.
I'm from like multiple generations of like landscapers, where it's
Mm.
like it's not even solopreneur, it's more so like they're self-employed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my
Hmm.
dad is self-employed. I remember so many times over the years growing up where my parents they always struggled with money. It was always hard to get money, and it was gone so quick. They struggled, and they're super hardworking people, just the most incredible, genuine, hardworking people. But they never quite got to that point where, "Oh, I could actually hire this out." So my dad still today, like, what's today? It's Friday. He's
Mm-hmm.
been out working in the hot sun in the summer, like
In
running
his
his business
60s.
by himself, because of that fear of like, "Oh, well, if I hire somebody, they're not going to do as good of quality as me. Or if I hire somebody,
Mm.
then I remember them
Figure out
saying this,
taxes.
well, I have to figure out taxes and stuff like that." And so it's like, I remember these conversations where they were like, "Never go into business for yourself." And now, as a business owner that has a team, I'm like, "Dad, please, like if he would let me sit down and be like,
Or
these are
let
the
us
people
teach
you
you to
need
at
to
least put
hire."
it on QuickBooks so it's done
Yeah,
digitally and they can pay you with a
they're
credit card
still like
versus
accepting
Yeah.
mailing a
like
check.
checks in the mail. So it's just like, it's interesting how it's like, I'm a rebel, I guess, in that sense, where it's just like they told me my whole life, like, never start your own business, and now we're like,
They also told you not to marry me. So
they
look how
also
that
said
worked
that.
out.
So I just kind of do the opposite, I guess, of whatever they say.
That's
But
funny. Yeah, that's insane. So, I mean, there's just so much that changes, right? And like, we're
mhm.
also of the same generation. I'm 36 myself, and we were taught, safe W-2 job, long
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
career, move up the
yeah,
ladder, linear progression, and like
Yep.
they weren't wrong. They're like
right.
it just changed. Like
Yeah.
they're
Hmm.
not wrong. Like that's what we call it, the boomer generation, whatever. That is true. That was true. That was what I was
Right.
raised on, and that's what I was told to do. And then it was about the time I turned 25, 26 that I was like, "Oh, that's not
Yeah.
like that's not in ink." That was their truth, but the truth
Yeah.
changes.
Hmm.
And I was
Hmm.
like, "Oh, it's going to change." And like even now, we look at like college education, we look at all these things with like a whole new set of eyes. and realize, oh, everything we've been told hasn't been a lie, but it is no longer true.
It's not the
Yeah.
only truth. It's
It's
one
not
of
the
those things
only
like
truth. It's
that
no
still
longer.
exists. I can go get the quote safe job and I can work my way up a corporate
Yeah.
that still exists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there are now new ways that didn't used to exist. And I
Right. It's
think
not the
that's the
only
key.
way anymore. I think there's the main path. The expectation is a certain area, but I think it's shifting. I think there's no more like there was such a stigma when we were younger. If you didn't go to college after your 12th grade year, it was just like, oh, what's
Yeah.
wrong with you? You know what I mean? Like it was just kind of it was like that was the set path. But now I feel like there's so many other paths you can follow. And I mean, going back to what you guys were talking about with your relationship and building the business, like there's no one right way to do it. You have to do what works for you on your time, on your schedule, and on your terms. And that's like the whole theme of everything is like you'll get there, but you have to like go through your own stuff first, right?
Yeah.
Definitely.
1000%.
Cool. So I really want to thank you for unpacking that story for us and really like diving deeper into the why behind the good in media and, your actual story and your relationship and building this. I know people can relate. And it's not always rainbows and butterflies. It's not always, just the high five across the the office.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know this because both me and Jason are both business owners now, and we got to talk about this stuff more. Like we got to
Yeah.
talk about
Yeah.
like the no secure job household,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
and what goes through your head during that because it's so important. But I want to thank you guys again for being back on the show, and yeah, any parting advice for our listeners from you guys when it comes to building a business with your spouse, like your like big, if nothing else, what do you want our listeners to walk away with?
I think for me, it's going into conversations, communicating what you want out of that conversation.
Hmm.
That's been
Mm,
something I learned from making that mistake so many times where I go into it and I'm not clear about what I want out of that interaction or that conversation. And then I walk away, I'm like, disappointed or upset. And then I'm like, well, if I don't even know what I wanted out of it, or I didn't convince you,
Convey.
communicate, convey that to
Sure.
you,
Either way.
then how can I expect that? And then I think it's just after that, just listen. Be willing to listen to each other and not react out of, you know, emotion. It's like we're on the same team. So
Yeah.
it's just looking at
mm,
it and then saying, okay, how can I support you? What is it that you need? And then listening.
Yeah. For me, I'll pivot slightly. But I mean, like for me, like my overarching message and why I started the business, the good in media, is throughout the entire mental health struggle. And I still struggle with it. It's not over. Like it's something that I
right.
have to think about consciously all the time. Brianne knows this. I have different days that are much different than others. But I learned two basic things, and it's literally the founding of everything. And that is that, like, no matter how bad a day is, there's always some good in it, and that too many people let bad moments ruin whole days. And for me,
Mm,
that was, the good in today is my podcast, and that's going to be relaunching here too. But I mean, that was why the company became the good in media. And we're not out to do drama podcasts and all these other things. Like we want to work with people who are going to be in the personal growth field. We want to help make a huge impact on this world. And I can do that through my own podcast. But the reason the business exists is if I can support hundreds of other people in putting messages out into the world, man, my ripple effect's a lot bigger, a lot faster than trying to do it all on my own. So I think that's like my thing is if you're someone who's going through like that mental health and like all of those kinds of struggles, A, know you're not alone, and B, find the good because there is some, even if it sucks to go through, because you have to acknowledge that it still sucks, but like there's an end to that tunnel. So
I love that. Absolutely love that. So thank you guys both for jumping back on the show. I really appreciate your time, and you guys are always welcome.
Oh my
thank
gosh.
you very
Thank
much.
you.
All right. Thanks, guys.